Welcome to Closing the Loop, a podcast presented by Lakeside Process Controls, where we connect you with experts, end users, and suppliers in the industrial automation industry. My name is Justin Koscak, Business Unit Lead for Measurement Solutions and the host of the show. Each episode, we're featuring special guests from either Lakeside, Emerson Automation Solutions, or other industry leaders. We hope that through these conversations, we can quite literally close the loop between your current knowledge and the latest and greatest in industry. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's special guest. His name is Matt Lensink from CEM Engineering, and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation that we had, as always, whenever we see each other. Now, Matt is the CEO of CEM, say that 10 times fast, and in this podcast episode, we talk a little bit about the background of CEM Engineering, what they're involved with, how they can help you, potentially the listener, and we go all the way to the end where we start talking about AI and potentially the use of an industry, which I know is always an exciting topic, and we cover a lot of stuff in between, specifically the energy transition. So Matt has his own podcast called Energy Radio, and he has had a lot of great guests on there that have a lot of details to share when it comes to things like hydrogen, renewable natural gas, biogas. So Matt's become a bit of a quasi-expert, as he claims. Quasi because, he might know the technical person who knows everything on it, and he's retained a few tidbits or two. So nevertheless, I think he's able to boil it down to much simpler terms for most people to be able to understand. So for that reason, I really enjoyed the time that we had together. And then even at the end, he talks a little bit through, looking through his crystal ball at what does the next 5 years have in store for Canada, have in store for Ontario. So nevertheless, it's a great conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. As always, if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And with that, I'll turn it over. Hopefully you enjoy the show. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you. This is great to be a guest on somebody else's podcast. I've been a guest on my own podcast.
Okay.
But I don't think, and I've been a guest once before on a solar PV. We did a reciprocal like this. So this is my second time, but this is great. This is a much better setup than I've ever been a part of. So this is awesome.
Something to look forward to dream, right?
It's something, yeah, when I grow up, I want to have a setup like this. And, I think I mentioned to you, I grew up listening to talk radio, particularly sports talk radio, the Fan 590.
Yeah.
And in that period where Sportsnet bought them, and then it was always on TV, particularly primetime sports on Friday afternoons. And so they always had this setup. So now it's like, oh, wow, I get to be part of this cool setup. So this is an honor. It's good to be here. That's
awesome. It's funny. So we did one of these episodes remote. Everyone has been in here except one of them was remote. And we just happened to be, I forget the facility name, but it was in Brandon, Manitoba. And it was where the Brandon Wheat Kings play. And so we were doing an event there, and I said, hey, I brought my podcast gear. Let's just do it with that as the background. So that episode should come out if it hasn't already, but so we're sitting there and you can see the background behind us of the hockey rink.
That'll be a great visual.
Now it's the summer. So they had just done an event there. They cleared off all the ice. So there's like bulldozers and stuff moving like dirt. They had a rodeo there.
Okay.
So I feel like it's if we're not entertaining, you could at least watch the background and get something out of it. So
that's great.
Anyway, so if you could maybe just introduce yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your background for the audience, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Matt Lensink. I'm the CEO and owner of a company called CEM Engineering. We are a project delivery firm, primarily engineering services, and we are primarily in the renewable energy space, mostly where there are molecules involved. So we do a lot of work in power generation, cogeneration. We do a lot of work in biogas and renewable natural gas, and hydrogen is probably the third area where we are most active.
Okay, yeah. I like that you said molecules.
Yeah, I differentiate. I say that a lot, and our electrical engineering teams don't love it. And we have a phenomenal electrical engineering group. But I always point out that our differentiator is where there are molecules involved, to differentiate from wind and solar, where they're predominantly electrical. We don't really stand out in those markets. We want to stand out in power generation, where we're you got gas and steam and electrons as well, but or RNG, where we're taking certain molecules and converting them to different types of molecules. Yeah. So that's really where we stand out, which is why I say that.
No, and it's something that hit me too, because earlier in the year, I was at an event and they had a guest speaker, and it was a natural gas focused event. And so he was a consultant, and so he was talking about molecular energy, and he was saying, look, we can debate all day about hydrogen, ammonia, natural gas, whatever you want, that's fine, but we need molecules. We can't get away from molecules. Long-term storage in batteries doesn't work. We don't have good solutions for that. You need to store energy in molecules. And that to me kind of hit home, where it was yeah, you know what? We can debate all day about the molecule type, but we're not getting away from molecules. And at our core business, it's molecules too.
Totally.
So it's so easy to just say to people, molecules are always around. They're always going to be around. That's what we operate with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, we need all kinds of molecules. As we go through this energy transition, as we look to, our slogan at CEM is building a more functional world. So we're always looking at how can the world become more functional through the projects that we do with our clients. And we don't have a crystal ball, and I don't think our clients do. You guys at Lakeside are really dialed in. I don't think you have a crystal ball.
No.
We don't know where this industry is going, so we got to try everything, right? And so there is a significant home for electrification as much as we can, but we also have limits around the infrastructure that allows us to electrify in an expedient and a safe manner.
Yep.
And so we need to leverage the molecule infrastructure that we have, natural gas. We need to look at all of these other things. We have to really throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this energy transition, because it is such a big task and we don't really know what's going to work. So we got to try everything. That's our view of the world.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're actually in a very fortunate place that we can try everything, right? Not every place in the world has all the luxuries that we do of being able to, hey, do we want to try nuclear? Do we want to try natural gas? We we have total flexibility.
That's a great point.
Which is also a bit of a problem, right? It's like going to a buffet. It's you just want everything, right? You load up the plate and.
Well, I don't know if you take sponsorships on this podcast, so I won't refer to the certain buffets that I like, but yeah, and I think as Canadians, particularly, whether it's there is a bit of a different approach to energy in the West. We have an office in Calgary, and then in the East, we have two offices here in Ontario. And so even that kind of the flexibility that presents itself, and then you mentioned our history with nuclear as a country and the CANDU reactor.
Yeah,
I was at dinner last weekend talking to somebody who works for AtkinsRéalis, and they're involved in some of the new stuff that they're doing around CANDU. So yeah, you're right. It's a real blessing for those of us in this space that we have both the geography and the history and kind of the mindset to try everything, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So maybe just talking a little bit more about CEM, maybe just giving us a little bit of background more on the company, sort of, how many employees, how long you've been around?
Yeah.
When did you take over?
Yeah, so we've been around for 23 years now. My uncle, Matt Lensink, started the business, and he started it after what he describes as his 25-year apprenticeship. So he started his career with what was then Union Gas.
Okay.
So he was on the utility side. He did a bunch of other different roles, and then 23 years ago started as a client-focused services business, consulting, engineering, design. I joined him about 15 years ago. I kind of left for a while to do biogas and then came back about 11 years ago. And finished kind of taking over 3 years ago. But he's still very involved in the business as an employee. But yeah, we're about 60 plus people right now. We have our head offices in St. Catharines. We have a Burlington office, and we have a Calgary office as well out west. And we're working kind of across Canada right now. We just finished a project in BC, very active in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec right now. And we work in the U.S. as well. And so we're predominantly, mechanical, electrical, process, civil, structural engineers. We do, on occasion, team with other companies to take a larger role. If a client is looking for a design build type execution, we can kind of expand our scope to do that. But yeah, that's us in a nutshell. We have a phenomenal team of engineers and project managers and a team around that. And we are very, diligent about how we run the business, and particularly about, core values and how that, makes up the team. And we every day goes by, we are more and more focused on that as a key differentiator for us. So yeah, I'm just every day get to come into work with the team that we have is just a real blessing and a real fun thing to do for me.
That's awesome to hear. And maybe it's obvious, but what does CEM stand for?
Oh, it isn't obvious. It stands for Charlie Echo Mary. No, it stands for cogeneration and energy management. So, and if you look at the logo, there are two arrows. And so the original symbol, the two arrows that make up the C, and it was reducing energy cost, which then increases earnings. So the original focus of the business, and it's still a large focus for us, was on industrial energy users. And so whether it was, on-site cogeneration or energy management, so using less, natural gas, electricity, water, that was the real focus. And it maintains a big part of our business. And we've expanded to do a lot of work for utilities and IPPs and developers. But it was really focused initially on how do we help industrial energy users use less energy and thereby increase, the earnings at the plant level.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I wondered because I remember talking to, I think it was David, and he was saying, it's in our name, and I went, what? Which is what?
Right,
right?
Yeah, yeah, and we, because we've broadened out to biogas and RNG and hydrogen. I mean, cogen is still our bread and butter.
Yeah,
it's a bell-tie fastball for us. But it's, it's not only who we are. A lot of people still think of us as only that, but we've really built out a strong biogas and RNG practice and a strong hydrogen practice as well.
Well, I'm happy I asked because, like in the measurement world, something like that CEM stands for is continuous emissions monitoring.
Right. Yes.
Right. So a CEMS or CEM system, right?
Yes.
Like that's something where like I talk about that basically every week. So I always go, oh, they do CEMS. No, not related. Really.
No, we try to keep our projects small enough that we can avoid a CEMS actually, because it's a lot of money on the back end of a some kind of appliance. But it also stands for a certified energy manager. So the Association of Energy Engineers in North America has a designation, which is a great designation. Many of our team have it, and I think it's a week-long course and a big test. But that people who are focused on managing energy at the plant or the institutional level, you can get a PMP if you're a project manager. It's the same thing. So I think those are to our benefit. The more people are thinking CEM, the better, right?
Well, it was
not intentional, but it's to our benefit.
It's all within the same world, right?
Yes, for sure. Yes,
that's awesome. So, and then in terms of your background, so you went to school at McMaster?
Yeah, yes, I'm a McMaster University grad. I studied mechanical engineering and management, which just means it took me 5 years to finish. But it gave me a business minor as well, which in my role now as CEO has been tremendously valuable. So I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I don't do much mechanical engineering anymore. My job really is to recruit and develop really good engineers for our team, that's much more fun for me than the actual engineering.
I was going to say, like, how do you do you miss the engineering, or do you like?
Yeah,
you engineer in different ways now.
I engineer in different ways, and I get I'm grateful for my engineering background because when you're in with clients or you're in with your team, I have a posture, which is kind of why I have a podcast, of asking questions, right? And so as you ask questions and then you start to peel back the layers of the technical onion, then that's really fun, like to learn the technical stuff. I like to learn it more than to apply it. I kind of get bored on the application, if I'm really honest.
Yeah.
But I do keep my technical chops fresh by staying in front of the client, staying in front of our team, and asking questions, and it gives you kind of a sixth sense, right? Like you can sniff something that doesn't really sound right, even if it's electrical or process or something that's not my discipline. I can kind of something doesn't line up there, right? And so that's the beautiful thing about engineering is we have those kind of fundamentals of how we see the world that we can build on wherever we go, right?
It keeps you fresh, right? Like
Totally.
Always learning. There always is something to learn, right? And like I don't know, I love going to visit site too for the same reason, right? It's just like, hey, walk me through your plant. Like, what's going on here? What does this thing do? What is that? And generally, people are receptive to that. Like someone who's been there for 20 years, are like, you care about this thing? You're like, yeah, tell me more about this. They're like, oh my God, I could talk all day about this, right?
Totally. I think people, first and foremost want to talk about themselves. And then second of all, they want to talk about, in our world, they want to talk about their operations, right? And so I think if you can ask, and that's why I love the podcast, because I get to bring people in, ask, questions, both commercial and technical. And my challenge is sometimes I go too far down the technical rabbit hole and I want to keep it at a certain level. But yeah, you're right. If it shows a real sense of interest and care if you go to somebody's facility and ask questions, and they just love to tell you about it, right?
And we'll get back maybe more a little bit into CEM in just a bit, because you brought it up. Maybe you could tell for those listening, about your podcast, how you got into that, because you got a lot of great guests on there.
Yeah, we run a podcast called Energy Radio, and it started, I think we've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now. And it was, like I mentioned earlier, because I grew up listening to sports talk radio, I just loved the medium, and I loved the conversational nature of it. And I knew that, podcast was a growing medium, and it was a really accessible medium, right?
Totally.
And so we just started doing it. And, we have had, great guests, over the years. We've had some folks from Lakeside, Chuck Kolkin, most notably. And Jerry Galata, actually. Is Jerry still working here?
I think Jerry retired.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Anyways, so we've had folks from Enbridge, we've had folks from 𝗬𝗓𝗧𝗦 Power, we've had folks, from all over.
Yeah.
And we've kind of narrowed the focus now on talking to folks who've done energy projects, and we want to hear their stories about their energy projects, right? Because all of us who are doing projects, we've all been through the ringer, we've all been through challenges. And so I think a lot of people are prepared to share those challenges in the hopes that other people can learn from them. And so we're kind of narrowing the focus in these last kind of 18 months on, so we did a 3.5 megawatt cogen project for International Wax. And so we had their plant engineer, Doran Marion, on recently. And so just to listen to the stories of, dealing with Toronto Hydro, or dealing with, how we got that into that very dense facility and built that plant there. Or, we had the vice president of 𝗬𝗓𝗧𝗦 Power, Kelly Greaves, who spoke about, the hydrogen industry more globally, right? But, or globally beyond the project. But yeah, just to have people like that are, so dialed into the industry. And my hope is that through the podcast medium, people can learn, even just one nugget, right, out of a podcast can pay dividends for somebody. So and for me, it's a fun way to learn, right? I sometimes joke that the podcast is purely selfish. It's, I'm smarter after an hour of doing the podcast. And then if we've captured that and other people can benefit, that's a derivative benefit, right?
That's basically how I describe ours too, where I get to learn. We could turn it into some clips for some marketing footage. Hopefully a few people at Lakeside listen to it. And any customers, great, even better, right? Not to mention the relationship too that you build with the person you're interviewing, right? Like that, there's a lot of value in that too.
Totally. Yeah, there is something about, the relationship changes when you talk to somebody and I don't know I haven't been able to figure out what it is, but I do think that, because you can come back to it, it's like, hey, yeah, so-and-so was on, you were on the podcast. Oh, yeah. There's just something there for sure.
A lot of people aren't on podcasts, right? A lot of times you're probably bringing them onto their first podcast. Or
most of the time, I sometimes will ask them, is this your first time? And most of the time it is their first podcast.
Yeah. It's different, right? I enjoy it, obviously, right? That's why I have this. It's so much easier to just talk to people. And I did a lot of webinars. That was my previous favorite format. But, it could take you an entire month of prep for a 30-minute webinar, right? Versus this is kind of, especially now with ChatGPT, hey, what are some questions to ask this person from this? And then just the conversation flows and you can ask different questions.
And my hope is that because doing the podcast is rather intuitive and easy, that then also digesting the content for the listener is similarly, intuitive and easy because of the format, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to the one where you had your uncle on, and it was a good one. It was when he was talking more about his union gas days.
Yeah, I think he's probably the number one guest in terms of number of appearances. Yeah. Just because in the early days when I didn't have a lot of guests, I knew he was not going to be boring. And he's just got a rich history. So yeah, if you go into Energy Radio and search Matt Lensink, you'll find some of his. Because we also brought him on to talk about some of the kind of the DNA of how CEM works and how we serve clients and some of that stuff. And so he's been a tremendous guest over the years for sure.
Yeah, so the one episode I'm thinking of, I think it was a more recent one, but he was talking about the rate case. He was talking about how Union or Enbridge gets paid, and there's a lot of these things that you might have known, but it was nice to hear articulated. And I actually sent that to our utilities team that works with Enbridge. I said, hey, when you have someone new join the team, just listen to this 30-minute thing. They're gonna absorb a ton that it'll take them a year or two to just naturally learn, but get them up to speed faster, hearing the right language, hearing what they care about, and
right. Yeah. That's a great reminder. Yeah, we did that one recently with him. And the impetus there was we were developing several projects. They were natural gas-fired cogeneration projects. And so we were dealing with the local gas utility. And I thought to myself, and he was involved, but I thought to myself, this value that he brings to these two projects shouldn't be limited to these two projects. So let's chat about that whole thing, and then hopefully that can bring value to other people developing projects. It's the last thing we want in our industry is white elephants, right? And projects that, maybe can't get an electrical interconnect, or in this case can't get a natural gas interconnect, or it's too expensive. So that was my hope, is that we avoid some of those projects.
What do you mean by white elephants? Sorry, I haven't heard that.
Oh yeah, so like a project that, sometimes people will develop a project, they'll spend a bunch of money, they'll put a bunch of equipment out wherever they're going to build the project, and then some key risk wasn't mitigated early on. So it's all just sitting there, and it's, it can't be used. So I think they call that a white elephant. And so there in our space, that has happened where somebody will get so far along and then they didn't do one key piece of due diligence early on, and then the whole project is just, useless, right?
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're trying to avoid that, right?
Wow. Absolutely. Okay. So going back to CEM a little bit. So obviously you talked to us a little bit about the history of it. So maybe you could talk about more forward looking, and, like you said, you've been more involved with biogas and hydrogen and some of those pieces. So how has that changed your business?
Yeah. So I came back to the business about 11 years ago. I had left to work in the biogas industry for a biogas design build company. And we did about 12 projects in Ontario and across Canada, primarily agricultural and industrial waste. And at that time, it was biogas to electricity. And so I came back to CEM, and we did at that time go through a big cogen boom. But then we kind of saw the market changing. And so based on my experience and Martin's experience, we felt comfortable kind of expanding our offering into biogas and renewable natural gas. And at the same time, there was a lot of companies coming into Canada from the US, and so they needed local presence. And so over the last, I would say 3-4 years, we've built a practice primarily on the landfill gas to renewable natural gas space. So that is taking landfill gas that is either currently flared or is burned in recip engines. And the landfill gas comes from landfills when they get covered. And then there's no oxygen there. The organics that are in that landfill break down and produce a gas that's primarily methane, but it has other constituents, and that's called landfill gas. And so these facilities that we're designing are basically gas processing plants that are taking that raw landfill gas, taking out the moisture, taking out the hydrogen sulfide, taking out the CO2, nitrogen, and oxygen are the big ones, and then injecting it into the natural gas station, into the natural gas pipeline as renewable natural gas. So that, we do a lot of that work. We're doing more and more biogas work, meaning, predominantly dairy biogas. So dairy manure is in the same way decomposing in the absence of oxygen. It's called anaerobic digestion. And then that produces a biogas that then can be either burned in an engine or a boiler, or what's common now is upgraded through some kind of either mechanical or chemical process to renewable natural gas. And the renewable natural gas is going to a couple different markets. In Canada, it's going primarily to British Columbia, and it's going to Ontario British Columbia and Quebec. Ontario, hopefully, if Enbridge is successful, they have a rate case application in front of the OEB right now to try to get approval to buy RNG. But in BC and in Quebec, they have a provincial mandate to get to a certain amount of their natural gas as renewable fuels. And so Fortis, BC, and the utilities like Énergir in Quebec are buying renewable natural gas to satisfy those compliance requirements. That's one pathway. In the U.S., in California, there's a low carbon fuel standard, which requires large vehicle operators to move. Well, they've already moved from diesel to CNG, compressed natural gas, and now they're moving to renewable natural gas. Wow. So and then the third big pathway is the RINs program in America. That's a federal program from the EPA. Basically, anybody who is a liquid fuel producer has a renewable volume obligation. They have to buy a certain amount of renewable fuels to offset the fuel that they're producing. And so that is another big kind of pathway for renewable natural gas. So we're currently working on both sides of the border in that space, but predominantly still in Canada and predominantly landfill gas to renewable natural gas.
Yeah, because that's what I was hearing too. So that's great to hear it from you. Was that it sounded like there was a lot of government support in California in particular for RNG.
Yeah, and we're seeing it in the federal level in the U.S. based on this RINs program.
Okay.
We're seeing it in California most notably, although that is now oversaturated from a supply perspective. But we're seeing other states adopt similar or adjacent programs, and so you will continue to see, we think, a growth in the demand curve or a continuation of the demand curve. And then, BC and Quebec have it at the provincial level. Ontario's trying to do it. There is a federal pathway as well called the Clean Fuel Regulation in Canada. It's mostly liquid, but you can get gaseous fuels like RNG into it as well. So we're seeing more and more government compliance and markets that are driven by government in both countries.
It's pretty interesting because I really feel like Ontario is generally ahead of the curve, and based on what you're describing there, it almost sounds like we're behind the curve when it comes to RNG, or is that not fair to say?
No, it's fair to say. I think you have, in the Quebec story, you have their electricity network is extremely clean because of all their hydroelectric. So cleaning up the natural gas grid.
It's the next logical thing.
Next logical thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not nearly, the demand is not nearly as big as it is in Ontario.
True.
In BC, I think Fortis BC is really, because, that everything's kind of one big utility, both electricity and natural gas, they were well positioned to look at the energy transition from a very pragmatic perspective, and they've said, "Listen, electrifying everything is the most expensive way to do this. A balanced kind of duality around electrifying and decarbonizing our natural gas supply is the more efficient way to do it for the ratepayer." And so that's why they've got buy-in. Ontario, without being too critical, has always been, I would say, fractured. The electricity and the natural gas sides have never really linked. They've always been separate, and so I think that's where there's been some challenges. I know Enbridge has been in front of the Ontario Energy Board multiple times to get approval for and have not had success yet. But hopefully third time's a charm on this one.
I didn't realize that BC was structured in that way, because to me, there's obvious right now there's competition between electricity and natural gas, and it's totally unnecessary, right? I get it. They're different companies, different organizations, different P&Ls. It's obvious why they are competing. But as a consumer, right, like as a resident of Ontario, what do I really care? Yeah. Right? Like as long as something can heat my home in the winter, right? Give me hot water, give me AC in the summer. Like I don't have a preference.
I think there's also a messaging challenge. And what I mean by that is for you and I who are in this energy space, we get excited about talking about, hydrogen molecules and what color is the hydrogen. And we talk about, what processes are needed to upgrade landfill gas to RNG. But I think the general consumer of energy at the residential level, each of which has at least one vote, for them to look at a wind farm and a solar farm, and then for them to look at, electric heating and EVs, those are all very easy to understand, right? And to say to them, well, and then conversely, it's also easy to vilify natural gas, right? And so I think the messaging is just much, much harder to articulate. Hey, we can decarbonate. How do you decarbonate? Well, we take landfill gas and we clean it up through a cryogenic process. Like, you're going to lose people, right? Where you can say, hey, wind farm, wires that are already there, EV, that pathway is easy. So there's a messaging challenge as well, right?
Yeah, actually,
it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
No,
right? It just means it's harder.
It's harder, absolutely. Trust me, I face it all the time with just general marketing, right? If like the simplest thing isn't always the most obvious thing, right, or the right thing, or I've definitely watched enough videos of people saying, they're saying the cow farts are heating up the world. What kind of craziness is that, right? And you're like, well, actually, if you compute how much methane is produced by the cows and the cattle industry and like nobody, like, they're like, oh, this is crazy. Farts are really heating up the world, right?
Right.
But there is a substantial volume that you can go capture, right? And so, like you said, it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah.
It definitely on our side too. That's, we've definitely been working with RNG, trying to see some of these projects come to completion. But I think the challenges that we've seen, at least, is there's not as much of the funding and the support and the subsidies. And like that, to me, especially as you're going through this transition, the subsidies have to be there, or the economics have to be there, whether they're subsidies or something else, right? Like or it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'm not a policy expert by any means, but I think what has driven the market is these compliance obligations, right? And so that's not technically a subsidy; it's It's more of a stick than a carrot in some regards, right? Where you have to get a minimum volume in the market, and so that then, because you need to fill a certain demand, then economics 101 tells you that if the demand is high, then the price will meet that, right? And so that's where Fortis because Fortis and Énergir need to meet those obligations, and they are a credit-worthy counterparty, then a developer can sign a 10-year deal with them. Maybe it's not as lucrative as California, but it's a 10-year deal that you can finance a project on. So I think if we see more of those, it's too bad in the clean fuel regulation that came out federally that it did not include gaseous fuels. Had it included gaseous fuels, you would have seen a very different RNG market. Had we gotten an investment tax credit, we would have seen a very different market. So yeah, there's definitely some more policy that would help, but I think we have for good projects right now, there still is a pathway to participate.
And I think it's a balance too, right? Because you don't want so many subsidies and government policies that now, like, Canada's just not competitive on a global basis, right? Like, so it's like, how far do you want to move the needle in one direction without now, okay, nobody's going to come to Canada to do business because it's too cumbersome, it's too expensive, it's too, X, Y, Z, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because, and I've said this recently, I heard a great talk at a conference recently from a guy from Texas. We have to remember in the energy space that there's three legs to the stool. Yes, the leg of sustainability is a very important leg, but so is the leg of reliability, and so is the leg of affordability, right? And if we just focus on the sustainability piece, then we're going to get great wind and solar assets, and on a non-windy night, we won't be able to run our electricity network, right? And so we need other assets to make it more affordable and make it more reliable. So yeah, you can't get too expensive that we price ourselves out of the market and then don't have a reliable energy network anyways, right? Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation. I have a friend who works at one of the nuclear power plants.
Oh yes, yeah.
That really narrows it down.
Yeah.
But we were just talking, about in generalities about how there's the trend for electricity demand is up, right? It continues to go up.
Yes.
Now there's a lot of factors built into that, right? Like immigration, but also the electrification of vehicles, right? And to me, those pieces there's a lot more unknowns with that. And so, the question we were talking about is, well, what if we don't get all these EVs? What if it's like 1 in 10 versus 9 in 10, right? And so what happens now is we're gearing up to have all this electricity, whether it be nuclear, whether it be, natural gas cogen, or like whatever it is, right? What are we going to do with all this excess electricity? Let's say that happens. You talk about white elephants, right? Maybe that's a great example of this. Could be this situation where now, okay, if we have all this excess electricity, what do you do with it? Do you sell it? Can you even sell it competitively in the States where maybe they still have like a coal burning power plant, right? Like, I don't know. I don't have those answers, but it was just a very interesting thing. Like, you're going down this path and you have this future that you have in mind, but there are so many unknowns. There's so many what ifs that it's pretty hard to forecast beyond 5 years, let alone 20, 50 plans, right? Like,
welcome to the headache that the IESO experiences day in and day out, right? That is the calculus that they are, trying to navigate. And you on one hand, I think that scenario is definitely more likely than people will appreciate. I agree with you. The flip side is we don't have reliable electricity and we drive away, manufacturing, right? And that is probably a more near-term scenario that we need to be mindful of as well. So, I'm glad I'm, running a business worrying about making payroll every 2 weeks and not worrying about that.
Yeah.
So kudos to those at the IESO and the Ministry of Energy who are trying to, because that's tough calculus. I will say that the more we can get the marginal cost of electricity or any energy is, I think, better for a society, right? And so, we have the luxury in North America to even worry about the carbon footprint of our energy, right?
Yep.
Most of the developing world just wants to worry about reliable energy and cheap energy. They can't even think they don't have the blessings that we do that they can think about,
Yeah.
the carbon footprint of their energy, right?
No, totally fair. So, and like you said, it's a very complex piece and it's forever changing. So it's, it'll be interesting to see how businesses adapt, how, Ontarians adapt, right? Canadians adapt in general. But it is funny. Like, I have an older furnace that, we're looking at upgrading, and I didn't even think about a heat pump. I was
Right.
like, we gotta get a new furnace.
Right.
And then someone said, why not a heat pump? And I went, I don't know.
Right.
It was
Yep.
it's just funny how you, like, some of these things you're so
entrenched
that you
Yeah.
haven't even thought about. And you're even I don't know, I'm looking at getting in a new vehicle, and I'm like, well, like, no, I don't know about electric, like maybe hybrid. I could see that with the, but like it's those thoughts, and like those have to change collectively, right? In order to meet that. And, economics is going to help with that too, right? Like,
yeah, we had early on in the podcast, we had Richard Laszlo and Tim Short. Tim Short used to be with Enbridge. Richard was, I think, early on in his career, Ministry of Energy. They now have a firm, Laszlo Energy Services. Both guys are brilliant. And I'll never forget, Richard, we were talking about EVs. This is probably 3 years ago. And Richard said, Matt, because I was expressing concerns about, how are we going to get the infrastructure there? How are we going to price it? How are we going to get, road tax? How do we deal with road tax, right? Because that gets charged at the pump for gasoline now.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah. And so Richard says, Matt, those are details. Those get figured out. The product is so good. The EV product is just so good. It will drive demand, and the rest of that stuff will just be problems for all of us to solve, right? And I think he's true. Like, I think he's right. Like there's a bit of a retrenchment lately, but I think EVs will continue. They're a great product for passenger vehicles. Like you, I'm trying to figure out my next pickup. Will it be a Ford Lightning or a GMC equivalent electric, or will it be hydrogen, right? But we have to keep those discussions front of mind. And my mother used to say that we need the extremes to move the middle, right? And so we need those kind of crazy ideas to move most of us who are in the middle in the right direction, right?
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about them figuring out taxes.
Right. Yeah, they'll probably figure it out.
They'll find a way. Cigarettes and booze, worst case, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's funny. Cool. Okay, so that was a good convo on,
it was fun.
on the RNG place. Maybe we'll just talk a little bit about hydrogen, because that's also part of the conversation, and that seems to be getting a lot more attention than I think RNG, at least locally.
Yeah. I say on our podcast, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody who wants to talk about hydrogen, and I think the difference there's lots of differences between hydrogen and RNG, and certainly at the molecular level, of course. But what RNG has so many things going for it. Where RNG struggles is the global supply question. So there's the supply curve. If you're a real nerdy graph person, it's asymptotic. Like at some point we will exhaust the amount of RNG we can make. That's not true, I don't think, with hydrogen, because you can make hydrogen from so many different sources. It's much better positioned to meet a global demand for energy that RNG just can't. RNG is just a drop in the bucket compared to what hydrogen could do. There is a lot of excitement about hydrogen. My view, in terms of business strategy, is that there's so much excitement, even if 90% of it doesn't happen, there's still going to be lots of good stuff happening.
Totally.
The challenge for hydrogen right now is how do you produce it economically, right? And so, and how do you match? We're kind of in this space in the hydrogen industry, with some exceptions, which we can talk about, that somebody's got to blink first, right? Whether it's on the demand side or the supply side. And the challenge is that at this point, to generate it, it's very expensive. And so there are not many places from a demand side that actually want it. And I think, we had Kelly Greaves on the podcast. She's the VP of hydrogen at Atura Power. Really brilliant individual. And her articulation was, listen, over the next 5 years, we're going to put hydrogen in mobile applications. So that's long-haul trucks, that's buses, where the carbon intensity of the incumbent fuel, natural gas or diesel, maybe natural gas, gasoline, is the highest, and the cost is the highest, right? So that's the first one. beyond that, kind of in the 3 to 8 year time period, we're going to put it into heavy industry that is already using hydrogen today, right? So steel making, cement, oil and gas, particularly where there's a lot of hydrogen happening. And then eventually, 10 years out, we may displace stationary fuel like natural gas. But we're nowhere near there from a price point. And so I think, that's okay. It's exciting to see a lot of hydrogen go into mobile applications. And so, now it's a matter of, can we build facilities that bring the price down that even the mobile applications to start want to take it up en masse, right? So that's I think where we're at, in the market. Certainly, there's a lot of activity happening in Eastern Canada because there's been this kind of promise of selling it to Europe, and there's stuff happening in Western Canada, different type of hydrogen. But there's lots of development initiatives in the U.S. as well with their investment tax credits. We're not yet at a point, with some exceptions, where actual projects are happening, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah, it is interesting. So, we've both been going to the Canadian Hydrogen Convention for the past couple of years, and it's been interesting to see how things have changed. But it does feel like there's a few people there who have done things, and there's everybody else who wants to learn about it, but hasn't done things, right? And it's like, and you kind of are hearing some of the same stories year after year, right? Because it's, things haven't progressed as fast as maybe people were expecting or they would hope. And exactly like I think you articulated, like for good reason, because there's certain areas you have to focus on first before you can broadly apply it to city buses and people's cars, right? Which is where everybody gets excited about, because that's, once you have that market, like that's where all the dollars are, I think, right? Like for the general population. Yeah,
and a minute ago, I talked about how there's like 3 big markets on the demand side in renewable natural gas. We don't have any of that in the hydrogen side. Like we don't have any compliance requirements. I mean, you can use hydrogen in the same way you can use RNG for those compliant markets, but it's too expensive. And so that's why I think this chicken and egg, or more actually a game of chicken, of who blinks first, is a bit more kind of awkward. But I mean, the province of Ontario has its low carbon hydrogen economy plan, I think it's called, that's actually going through a refresh right now. And so there's definitely political will there. In the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's significant both production and investment tax credits around hydrogen. So there's definitely, market signals that we need to do this. And like I said earlier, I think the demand, the ability to satisfy the global demand is what hydrogen has going for it. But it's like anything, there's details we got to sort through.
Yeah, and I think on our side so far, where we've seen a lot of it is the hydrogen blending, right? Blending it into natural gas, right? And so, that looks very familiar to what many people are used to. It's not totally switching to 100% hydrogen, and maybe you've seen some of the challenges, but like working with hydrogen it's a molecule, but it is also different than just working with natural gas. And so there are things you have to change, you have to account for. That does make it challenging. So like newer incumbents, they might not be familiar with all that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our hydrogen foray as a firm has not been on our own, right? We've partnered with, firms on our largest hydrogen project. We've partnered with a firm out of Vancouver called 𝗧𝗜𝗍𝗦 Engineering, who has done hydrogen for many, many years. And so they have that experience. But, as an example, the hydrogen molecule, for those of us who remember grade 11 chemistry, is just physically a smaller molecule than 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens attached to it, which is natural gas or methane. And so, things like embrittlement of the pipe, and, having, hydrogen, evacuation. Like there's different things that, you probably have guests on this podcast that can speak to it much better than I can. But it's definitely, even from an operational challenge, we had an issue on one of our projects where, the operations team that were going to assume the project had a level of, uncertainty around hydrogen that they didn't have around other fuels. Right?
Yeah.
And so everything's new. And then even from a regulation or regulatory perspective, here in Ontario, we have the TSSA regulating hydrogen, but it's, are the right codes and standards there? If so, how do we apply them? So definitely we're kind of in some ways feeling around in the dark. On the other hand, gray hydrogen, which is hydrogen that's made through steam methane reforming, where you don't capture the carbon on the back end, that's been made for many, many years because many industrial processes need it. So there's lots of, precedent. So on one hand, yes, it's new because it's green or it's blue or it's pink or whatever it is. But it's not, nothing's new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
And so, the hope would be that the regulating bodies would lean on some of that history. And that also means that there's a knowledge base out there that we can draw upon, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's definitely an observation that I had, again, from going to those conventions, was there's people that have been in the industry for a long time, and they've either worked with hydrogen or hydrogen just wasn't like a big thought by comparison, right? Like it was, wow, it's just another molecule we work with. But there's also a lot of people that I feel like are trying to jump on the hydrogen bandwagon. And that's where I think there's a lot of risk, at least for this industry as a whole. Like it's just somebody trying to make a quick buck. They spun up a company, they're trying to jump on this, and they might not have any experience or any knowledge, right? And so that's where I think like companies like Lakeside and CEM are a big differential, because it's like, no, this isn't anything new for us.
Right.
Maybe you're applying it differently. Maybe there's different, the standards that have to be developed, or like, yeah, that piece could be new, but like in terms of what flow meter or what valve, like we know, like that's something that we know how to handle, right?
Yeah, I think we were probably not as close to it than as you folks are, but that's why we brought some partners along with us. But yeah, it's, so we go eyes wide open, and we have the humility to say we don't totally understand this, and so we need people around us that do. But in terms of putting complicated pieces of equipment together with each other, doing a system design, doing integration with, if it's green hydrogen, with the electrical utility, that stuff is second nature to us. So that's where we felt comfortable getting into it. But yeah, whenever and we saw that in RNG too. Whenever there's a big boom in the market, it's going to attract a lot of good players, and it's going to attract some bad actors as well, right? And that's just inevitable, and we all have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, we could definitely speak on that.
Sure.
So, so, I guess in general, whether we're talking hydrogen or RNG, I think that's the trend that things are going. People are being more conscious of their energy. People are making investments. Are there any general takeaways that you've had from working with some of these companies that maybe they're new to this that you can share? Like, let's say somebody doesn't have the exposure to hydrogen, and maybe their boss is asking them like, hey, we got to try to figure out some sort of strategy around implementing it. Like, where do you start? How do you, where do you go?
Yeah. I would say, reach out to those who are your trusted advisors, whether that's your Lakeside rep, or it's, whether it's a team like ours. I think having a list of questions and then bringing in a trusted advisor to start answering those questions, and educating you. Like, our philosophy with our clients is that, we leave them, after every interaction, we're leaving them smarter than when they met with us, right? And so this heart of a teacher to kind of educate them, I think is really an important stance to take when you're a trusted advisor. And we don't know their process, or we don't know their story, and so we can't presume to know the right application, but we can presume to take what we know and educate them. And so I think those who are kind of looking at it, just have the heart of wanting to learn, and that's going to take time and talking to the right people. And once you progress and you start to look at potential projects or potential technology, then you got to move to a different phase of learning, which is going and seeing stuff and asking questions around how have things been operating, how many facilities do you have in operations. Like, not only do you get service providers in a newer market, but you get technology folks as well who kind of spin up, and do they really have the operating history that if you buy their equipment, it's going to run successfully for 10, 15, 20 years, right? So I think it's really just being comfortable and confident to ask even the dumb questions, right? Because you're going to uncover a lot, right? Yeah.
And honestly, I like I said, people are excited about hydrogen, but there's probably a lot you can already do with your process to hit your sustainability goals, or hit whatever goals or targets that you're trying. Like I don't think that there's a lot of processes that I've worked with that are really operating at the efficiency point that they could, right? Like, there are opportunities within those processes, just like reducing costs, right? Reducing energy usage in general.
Yeah, and certainly you have to always look at those three legs, right? Affordability, sustainability, and reliability, right? And so right now, industrial energy users, institutional energy users, there's, to your point, there's a bunch of probably energy management stuff that can be done first and foremost. And then there's there's stuff that normally would be available that due to carbon tax isn't, affordable right now, right? And that may change, right? And so we have to think about that. But yeah, there's probably energy management stuff to be looked at first. And then, as you get to a really efficient way, then you start to look at, can I burn RNG? Can I burn hydrogen? Should I look at electric boilers for heat? All those different things. Should I be looking at maybe even carbon capture to decarbonize? So yeah, you have to, that's like a feasibility study. You got to look at all those options and consider all those options, and look at the costs associated, because they're not cheap, right?
Absolutely. Where do you think industry goes towards, and how do you think CEM adapts or evolves, or maybe it's just status quo and just keep it coming? What does that look like?
Yeah, these views are purely my own and do not reflect the views of the organization, which I can't.
We have a banner at the beginning of the podcast for that. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I can't really use that because I own the business, so they're one and the same. But if I'm speaking totally candidly, I do think that we see a significant change in our carbon tax. I think federally we're going to have an election in the next year. We're also likely going to have a provincial election in the next 8 months. So we're going to see probably some pretty big changes on the carbon tax side. Depending on what those changes look like, I think we may see the return of some more on-site generation, because generating through cogeneration on-site, both electricity and thermal energy, is much more efficient than independently generating, having electricity come in and generating, steam or hot, thermal oil or something, just dedicated. So I think some of those things will be back on the table. But I think, to your point, in an industrial setting, incremental improvements will always be, the biggest thing. Big macro changes to process are expensive and they're hard to get, over the line. And so I think incremental changes, whether that be small capital projects, whether that be behavioral. So I think we're going to see that. And the other thing I'm really excited about is, I know this is, the new buzzword, but AI. And, Kamala Harris would say it's only 2 letters. She's right. But I think, that's a very general comment, but there's applications of that is going to be really, really important. And so how do we optimize our processes using AI? That's going to take some time, and there's going to be some people that kind of stand up good businesses in that space. But I think, we're looking at it every day. We're spending a lot of money, internally trying to figure that out, and hopefully that brings value to our clients. But yeah, I think, optimizing, around, time of use and those kind of stuff, can AI make that better? But yeah, if we don't see a change in the carbon tax, unfortunately, you are going to see, as it goes up, you are going to see, what you talked about earlier, being competitive on a global front. You're going to see some marginal producers just shut down because, at $100 a ton, $115, like as it goes up every April 1st, their ability to be cost competitive is just going to erode, right? And so I think we need to see that, change so that we can continue to be cost competitive.
Yeah, exactly. And then just, work with industry to get to these pieces, as opposed to maybe like laying down the hammer and just right. Like it needs to be more collaboration.
More collaborative. Yeah. And I think the other thing that we see is the known unknowns. Like there's stuff out there that we don't know is coming. We know it's coming, but we don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited for that. Like what are the, developments that, somebody's working on in somebody's basement somewhere that we haven't been able to apply yet, right? And so, we have a kind of a subset of our team that's always keeping their eyes out for that kind of stuff. We've set up a separate company that's active in the solar thermal space. So for food and beverage applications, there's a way to generate hot water or high temperature or low pressure steam using just solar energy. And so then you've decarbonized, with no, you don't have to buy RNG or hydrogen. You can just, as long as the sun continues to shine, and if it doesn't, we've got bigger problems. You're making your heat. So yeah, there's different technologies that are going to continue to emerge that are going to help on the industrial side.
Yeah, and like you said, like it's there's so much coming. There's so much unknowns. And I mean, they always talk about how technology changes at like an exponential level, right? So to me, predicting the future only becomes exponentially more difficult, especially when we're talking, industrial automation and some of like the industry trends like that. Like it has to be able to adapt to meet the needs of the consumer, and the needs of the consumer are evolving rapidly.
Yes.
So to me, it's like, it just becomes this conundrum that gets, it's a harder and harder nut to crack over time. And
yeah, and I think I heard a talk from Amy Edmondson. I don't know if you know her. She's the one. She's a Harvard professor who wrote the book. I think it's called Psychological Safety.
Okay.
Anyway, it's about how do you create a working environment or an institutional environment that allows for failure that you can learn from. Mm-hmm. So she has a framework for intelligent, what she calls intelligent failures. And one of the key tenets of that framework is that the failure must be only big enough to get the desired learnings. Meaning,
I like that.
Let's fail in small ways. Let's try small stuff, big enough that we learn from it, but small enough that we don't bet the farm, right? And so that's why I think big wholesale changes are less likely. Let's try some new metering. Let's try some new control philosophy on a subset of our plant, and then we'll learn from it, and then we'll. So I think we're going to see hopefully that as we adopt AI, as we adopt other technologies, I think we're going to hopefully focus on how do we fail only large enough to learn from it, right? So I think that's something we're trying to use more often.
And I know it's the buzzword of probably the decade now, AI, but like honestly that, there is a lot of potential for those who know what it is and know how to use it, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Do you see yourself trying to adopt that to some capacity at CEM, or like, how do you think that plays out for you guys?
Oh, huge. We have a standing weekly meeting as an executive team, and now one of the standing agenda items is where have you used AI in the last week?
Oh, that's cool.
And that's part of, it's a fun information sharing, but it's more about being clear with the team that you must be figuring out how to use AI within your role, and you must be trying stuff if you want to kind of be part of our team long term, because particularly in the knowledge space, like what we're doing, I think it's critical. So, we're looking at it around obviously things like, how do you do proposals more efficiently? Well, AI is, but for us, I think the real kind of, we've done some small stuff, like we built a chat bot based on our HR manual, right? So you don't have to go to 300 pages of an HR manual. You just say, hey, what's CEM's policy on work boots, right? And it can tell you. But I think, things around the design process, modeling pipe, I think the big thing for us is going to be quality control. And so you start to load things into the AI that are like your design basis report, and then you can take a new deliverable and put it in the AI, and it can check against the design basis report and say, nope, that's not the pipe spec you're supposed to use. So that, I think from a quality perspective,
totally,
that's really where the application is. We're not there yet, but we're starting to fart around with it. So it's a buzzword, but we're trying to turn it into action as quickly as we can. And we got big dollar values in our budget to actually put our monies where our mouth is. Because if we don't, we're going to watch the rest of the industry move on, and we'll be stuck holding the bag, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely, right. Like to me, it's like a calculator, right? Like it's a tool, and if you're not using the tool, like why are you doing math by hand still, right? Like and
that's an important way to think about it, because I know initially we had a lot of hesitation internally around AI. And I think because a lot of people thought AI was going to replace the work. But if you think about it, to use your analogy, that would be like engineers having hesitation around AI is like engineers saying, yeah, I don't want to work. I'm worried about Excel, or like
Excel's coming for our jobs.
Yeah. And it's like, no, it's a tool that you use. You still are the responsible party. You need to satisfy yourself that Excel is doing, the math right, or AI is doing the work right. But it's a tool. It's an extension of you in the same way your computer is a tool, right? And so I think if you reframe it that way, I think it demystifies some stuff, and people can think of it in a different way.
Those people probably haven't used it yet. Like
right.
To me, like any time that I've used it, it's always, it might get you 25, 30, maybe even 50% of the way sometimes for what you're trying to do. And then and then you can actually put your touch into it, adjust it. Like it gets you the base work.
Yep.
And like, it's never delivered me something that was 100% perfect, 100% complete. Like, and I don't want it to,
right.
Cause then you're replaceable, right? Like,
right.
like that, then there is voice that concern, but it can't, right? Like
Right.
it can't put your flavor. It can't know everything that you know and all your personal experiences. I mean, maybe it can in time, but like, you know, it's anytime that I've used it, it's always been an enhancing.
Yes.
And it's like, wow, I did this thing way more efficiently, or maybe it helped me try to formulate things better, or like it's a tool.
Yeah, it does the middle well, right? Like it doesn't do, you know, the original idea, like it can't conceive of anything, right? You have to do that. And then I think the editing at the back end, you have to do it, and it does the messy middle part really well.
Yeah.
You mentioned a point, you know, people haven't worked with it. I was at an event where one of the Microsoft executives was speaking, and her advice was, you need to be spending 11 minutes a day, every day, with AI to really understand it. Like, see, it's like anything. You don't learn to ride a bike by just getting on it. You got to work with it. Yep. You got to learn it as a tool, right?
It's funny. Yesterday, I was, I was just messing with some data in like personal like finance stuff related to ChatGPT, and it must have taken me maybe 3 or 4 hours and maybe like 20 different like revisions where like I was trying to get it to model certain things for me. And it was hilarious because it was like it kept forgetting stuff. I'm like, what the heck? Like I told you this is the starting price for this. And you know, and it's like, oh, sorry, I forgot. Right. How did you forget your bloody AI? But after those 20 revisions, like I got to the point that I wanted, and it helped me. And like I had done this analysis like independently on my own, and I have this whole spreadsheet that I modeled for what I was trying to do. And so it took, you know, what took me probably days, it was able to then do in still 3 hours, right? And then I used it to validate what I did independently made sense, and I let this tool kind of validate my work. And so maybe next time I would have just did it in there, but like you said, you have to know how to get what you want out of it, which is such a huge aspect.
And you know, the framework of it being a tool, you know, you wouldn't use the same flow meter to measure, you know, water as you would hydrogen, right? Like, you know, so there are different AI tools, right? And so whether it's Llama, whether it's Gemini, whether it's, you know, Copilot or OpenAI, or there are different tools, and you just have to use the right ones. Like very early on when we were starting to try it, our engineers brought a whole bunch of math to it, and it failed miserably. Like calculate the volume of a cone, right? It failed miserably. Where if you is it Wolfram Alpha?
Oh yeah,
you know,
an AI now.
So you bring that, you know, that knocks it out of the park from a math perspective, right? So you just have to find the right tool. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm sure we could talk about AI all day.
Yeah, that's probably a different podcast.
That's a whole other separate podcast. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, Matt.
Yeah, this was fun, really fun.
It's definitely always great being on the other side of the desk.
It is. Yeah. No stress.
Yeah.
Not worried about time, not worried about, you know, where are we going in this meandering conversation.
Yeah.
I hope I was helpful in keeping it, you know.
No, I learned a lot. So if I learned a lot, hopefully someone out there learned a lot. So
hopefully.
Anybody who's listening right now, if they want to learn more about maybe CEM or just the industry in general, you know, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you can do is after you've subscribed to this podcast, you can subscribe to the Energy Radio podcast.
I like that.
Wherever you get your podcasts. Our website is CEM, so Charlie Echo Mary Echo Nancy Grandma ENG.ca. That's our website. I'm Matt at CEMENG, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So reach out however you want, and if you want to be a guest on our podcast, by all means. Or if you want to chat about anything else, happy to chat. This was really fun, Justin. You have a great setup here. I have podcast envy for sure.
We'll see an upgrade on your next show.
You'll definitely see an upgrade.
That's awesome.
No, this is fun, and you guys, I love your podcast, and it's above my head most of the time technically, but no, this is great. Thanks for having me on.
No problem, Matt. Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And like Matt said, be sure to subscribe to both our podcasts, whether it's Energy Radio or Closing the Loop, so you never miss an episode and you always stay up to date with the latest and greatest industrial automation. So thanks, everybody. Take care for now.